To say that this is about war rape is really is missing what you've just read. Like, people
Right?
soldiers at the end of a battle raped the people that they had just conquered, male, female, or whatever. And so to say that this is about that practice or countering that practice is completely missing what the passage says. If at war you see someone you desire and you want her to be your woman, right? No mayor, no husband and wife in the Hebrew, but like you want her to be yours, this is how you handle it. When you are abusing someone, that is not about desire. Rape is not about desire.
Hmm.
Rape is about it's about power, it's about abuse, it's about flexing. And so when you this whole thing is about not about the context of rape. This is about how it's appropriate in their world to take a foreign woman as your property. This isn't about right. It's like out of
Hmm.
the gate, I'm like, he is pissing me off because he doesn't understand what rape is.
The idea that rape is not about desire is one of the most bizarre feminist theories out there, and the evidence supporting this claim is astonishingly weak. Through extensive research on this topic, I have compiled a significant amount of data debunking this assertion, which I will share in this video and in future ones. One major issue with people making this claim is their inability to understand that not all motivations for rape are the same. They seem to believe that all rapists are either sadistic or power-hungry, aiming solely to exert violence and dominance over their victims, with sexual desire playing little or no role in the act. This oversimplified view fails to account for the plurality of motivations behind sexual violence. Because this false claim is so prevalent and consistently spread, I am introducing a new term to address it: feminist rape myths. I define this as false or misleading information about rape that originates in or is primarily associated with feminist narratives. The idea that rape is not about desire is a feminist rape myth. To disprove the claim that rape is not about desire, I don't need to show that all rape is sexually motivated, only that a significant portion of it is. If I can demonstrate this, it becomes clear that the claim is, at best, an oversimplification, and at worst, a myth. My first piece of evidence, which is not to say it is the best, comes from Professor of Criminology Shannon M. Barton-Balesa and Professor of Criminal Justice Robert D. Hanser in their book, Community-Based Corrections, page 548. For the sexual gratification rapist, aggression is simply instrumental and used to gain compliance. However, unlike the power reassurance rapist, this offender is not necessarily withdrawn or reclusive. Rather, this offender may simply desire sex and may be in a situation where he feels that force or coercion could successfully get the sexual intercourse that he wants. This type of rape is most reflected by date rape and similar forms of sexual assault. It may or may not be a repetitive behavior, depending on how any previous attempts at coercion have ended. It is unlikely that this type of offender will allow the coercion or aggression to escalate to the point of serious injury to the victim. This type of offender may have a high degree of social and interpersonal competence, and the sexual offense is likely to reflect more sexualization in both activity and interaction. Further, the offender is likely to express his interest in the victim as a sex object. However, he may use any means of cajoling, flattery, or pleading while using the gentlest of force necessary to encourage the victim to submit to his desire. Within this group of offenders are those who drug their victims, e.g., with Rohypnol or excessive alcohol, or by providing the drug ecstasy, and there is often no use of physical violence against the victim. The offender simply has sex with the victim without the person's consent. This is still clearly rape, but it is also not based on attempting to cause pain to the victim as much as it is designed to gratify the sexual urges of the offender. The offender who is successful in this type of rape is likely to repeat the act with other victims as well. Further, it should be noted that many victims will fail to report the act because they know the offender, perhaps very well, or there may be a sense of guilt or shame. In addition, the intoxicated state of the victim does not help her sense of credibility, in her mind if nothing else. Thus, the act tends to go unreported. This method of rape is a primary tactic used on many college campuses and among individual students as well as student groups that may rape, such as members of fraternities or athletic groups or teams. There you have it. Decades of feminist rape mythology debunked with less than a single page. But I will go on, because we cannot expect someone to give up any long-held belief based on a single source. One of the most important scholars on the question of rape motivations is the professor of sociology, Lee Ellis. His refutation of the feminist myth is brilliant and irrefutable. On page 22 of his 1989 book, Theories of Rape, Inquiries into the Causes of Sexual Aggression, Ellis provides strong evidence against the feminist claim. Third, studies in which date rapists reported often trying a number of tactics other than rape suggest that domination is not their main objective, since these other tactics include such things as falsely pledging love, threatening to break off the relationship, trying to get their date drunk, and simply ignoring the female's protests as they fondle or disrobe her. Only when these non-raping tactics fail, or seem likely to fail, do most date rapists resort to physical constraint, and eventually even injury. From this evidence, Mosher and Anderson reasoned that it would be more parsimonious to consider all of these male behavior patterns, including rape, as reflecting the same basic goal, i.e., to have sex, than to contend that when they rape, their goal is power and domination, but when they lie or try to get their dates intoxicated, their goal is sex. Ellis provided other arguments which I will share elsewhere, but here is part of his conclusion. The feminist theory seems to considerably underestimate the degree to which rape is sexually motivated. The feminist explanation that rape is about violence, not sex, cannot make sense of this data. If the feminist explanation were true, we would expect violence beyond what is necessary to restrain the victim. We would predict that the perpetrator would use excessive force and have a desire to harm the victim. The feminist framework cannot explain why many rapists use the gentlest force necessary to encourage the victim to submit. Why would a rapist attempt non-violent methods, such as flattery or cajoling, if their goal were purely to exert power or inflict harm? If every rapist were motivated by the enjoyment of power and sought to assert as much dominance as possible, they would likely bypass any non-violent tactics and immediately resort to an attack. Such an approach would probably provoke more resistance, creating a greater opportunity to demonstrate power. It is obvious that the claim that rape is not about desire is in many cases bogus. Anyone who hears this claim should call it for what it is, a feminist rape myth. And if you hear this claim, send them this video, as you should do for all my videos. I want to share another type of rapist that has little interest in violence for the sake of violence. This is a rare type, but it further refutes the dogma that rape is about abuse or flexing, not desire. And to be clear, I am not saying no rapist is motivated by the desire for violence or power or abuse. No one is saying that. I have not seen a single scholar say these don't play a part in some rapes. But I am debunking the oversimplified nonsense that says rape has little or nothing to do with sexual desire, but only is about violence and power. And I am not saying that even when sexual motivation is the main desire, power or domination plays no part. It may or may not play a part. There can be multiple motivations for rape all at the same time, but there can also be a single motivation, which is something many feminists deny. As described in the book, Sexually Motivated Crimes, Hazelwood, 2009, has explained that when using the term unselfish in the analysis of these crimes, the word has an entirely different meaning from its common meaning of sharing or caring. According to Hazelwood, pseudo-unselfish behavior by the rapist evidences his belief that his exhibited concern for the victim's welfare will convince her that he is not a bad person. He has noted that for this rapist, the victim's enjoyment or pretense of enjoyment in the activity is crucial to his need for acceptance and power, thus fulfilling his fantasy of the victim's willingness to participate. According to Hazelwood, the unselfish rapist will verbalize in a manner that most people would associate with a consensual relationship, not a rape. This rapist will attempt to reassure the victim that he does not intend to harm her, and that if she complies with his instructions, he will not hurt her. Although he is frequently complimentary, he may tell her that she is beautiful, must have several boyfriends, or speak other kind words. He may also speak in a self-demeaning manner. This rapist may demean himself by stating that the victim would never consider dating him or would not like him if she really knew him. Contrarily, his verbal statements may be intended to engage the victim in ego building, whereby he demands her to tell him that she loves him, wants to date him, or wants him to make love to her. Sexual behavior. Hazelwood has stated that the pseudo-unselfish rapist attempts to involve his victims verbally in his fantasies of a consensual relationship. Additionally, he will not normally force sexual acts once he encounters verbal or physical resistance from her. Although his reluctance to use physical force may result from a lack of confidence, Hazelwood has suggested that this rapist is more likely attempting to transform his fantasy of a willing partner into reality, and the use of force would corrupt that fantasy. In cases where the victim resists, the pseudo-unselfish rapist may cease his demands, attempt to negotiate or compromise, or leave the scene. According to Hazelwood, he seldom will resort to physical violence. In an attempt to sexually stimulate the victim, the pseudo-unselfish rapist often engages in criminal foreplay, such as fondling or caressing the victim and demanding that she kiss him, inserting his fingers vaginally, or performing cunnilingus, oral contact with the vulva or clitoris, prior to penetration. When confronted with victim resistance, he will spend a relatively brief period of time with the victim. When the victims are passive or intimidated, he may act out his fantasies, including fellatio, oral contact with the penis, anal sex, the insertion of foreign objects, and vaginal rape. However, these acts are not committed in an intentionally painful manner. Hazelwood has cautioned investigators that pseudo-unselfish and selfish rapists may both engage in or demand the same sexual acts. However, the pseudo-unselfish rapist commits these acts when he encounters a lack of resistance, while the selfish rapist commits his acts in spite of resistance. The selfish rapist's behavior reflects his intent to degrade the victim, involving a sequence of anal, oral, and vaginal rape. The pseudo-unselfish rapist's sequence of sexual acts is more commonly oral, vaginal, and anal rape. The pseudo-unselfish rapist typically uses a minimal level of physical force during his assaults with the intention to intimidate rather than to punish. Mild slapping may occur, but he does not intend to physically injure the victim. The pseudo-unselfish rapist typically relies on threats, the presence of a weapon, or the victim's fear or passivity to obtain her compliance. Does this profile sound like someone who is attempting to uphold the patriarchy and keep all women in a state of fear and intimidation? Does this profile fit according to what so many feminists say, that rape is about violence and intimidation, not sex? Would this rape have happened if not for the element of sexual fantasy? This rape does involve the motivation for power, but it would not have occurred if not for the sexual fantasy. How many examples do we need to provide of rapists who are not interested in violence before feminists give up the claim that rape is about violence, not sex? Yes, some rapists want to exert power, violence, intimidation, abuse, or otherwise, but the idea that all rapists want that is misinformation. The rape is about violence, not sex narrative needs to be abandoned. But what about in wartime? Is rape a strategic weapon of war that aims to punish and abuse and has little or nothing to do with desire? There are plenty of sources that discuss non-sexual motives for rape in war. I do not wish to challenge them here and do not necessarily disagree with all of them. All I am arguing for is that the denial of the sexual motive is nonsensical. So I will only present research that debunks this feminist rape myth. In the book, Women Against War System, it says, according to the weapon of war theory, sexual violence embodies a systematic, pervasive, or officially orchestrated aspect, and specifically targets women of opposing ethnic, religious, or political groups as an attempt to either disrupt the social structure or exercise ethnic cleansing. The key added value that this theory has provided is an instrumentalist understanding of sexual violence, whereby it is no longer considered a mere byproduct of war, but instead a planned and targeted policy. This theory is problematic for two main reasons. Firstly, it assumes that sexual violence during conflict is only deemed to be strategic, i.e., carried out on behalf of a group, while it could actually be opportunistic, i.e., carried out for private and not collective purposes such as sexual gratification for the aggressor or because the victim has defied the rules. I will point out that the book also critiques the idea of sexual gratification being a motive, but I find the critique nonsensical. You can read it on page 101. In the book, Handbook on the Study of Multiple Perpetrator Rape, it says, even though there is a substantial amount of literature related to wartime rape, the reasons why men rape during war have been under-researched, with very few empirical studies conducted. While some authors emphasize the role of sociocultural or situational factors, others propose that individual and psychological factors must also be taken into account. In an attempt to find out why soldiers rape during war, Erickson Boz and Stem, 2009, interviewed soldiers in the Congo who had been involved in the recent war in that country. They found that the soldiers described two types of rape, one which they said was sexually driven lust rape, and another, evil rape, motivated by anger and rage. They explained that the lust rapes were related to men being deprived of sex, while the evil rapes arose from frustrations related to the act of warring, poverty, and neglect. Erickson Boz and Stem concluded that these soldiers explicitly linked their rationale for rape with their inabilities, or failures, to inhabit certain idealized notions of heterosexual manhood. The claim that rape is not about desire is nonsense. A significant motivation for rape is sexual desire. The final source I will present to end this feminist rape myth comes from criminologists Anthony Walsh, Jessica Wells, and Sean M. Gann in their book, Correctional Assessment, Casework, and Counseling. The views of the rapist in the professional literature run the gamut, with many of the opinions being strongly colored by such non-objective factors as personal morality and sexual politics. Each view, of course, fits some rapists, but no view fits all rapists. There are those who regard rape as being symptomatic of some dark psychological disturbances, and others who see it simply as part of a complex of cultural values that emphasize macho masculinity, power, aggression, and violence. The first of these views is exemplified by the work of Drzazga, who explains rape as an act performed by degenerate male imbeciles seeking to satisfy sadistic and aggressive desires for sexual dominance. 1960, page 57. In this perspective, rape is a violent rather than a sexual act in which the penis substitutes for the gun or knife. The feminist perspective generally rejects the idea of sexual motivation for rape, although some feminists now recognize the sexual motivation for rape, claiming that the not-sex argument was initially necessary to emphasize that women got no pleasure out of being raped. Gilmartin, 1994, Herman, 1990, Mealy, 2003. This view may be accurate in some unknown percentage of rape cases, but to ascribe such motivations across the board is to commit what philosophers call the logical fallacy of affirming the consequent. Affirming the consequent means that having observed the consequences of an action, we infer that they were the motivations of the actor. Thus, we observe that the rapist asserts his dominance over his victim, and in doing so humiliates, defiles, and degrades her. It is unwarranted, however, to assume that this outcome necessarily constituted his motivations for his crime. The contemporary treatment literature is replete with studies that explicitly or implicitly view rape as sexually motivated. This is evident by the treatment modalities, which emphasize cognitive restructuring for deviant sexual fantasies and/or medications designed to reduce sexual arousal. Science rather than sexual politics should be the guide to the true nature of this horrible crime. In a plea to depoliticize rape, Craig Palmer asserts that the not-sex explanation prevents researchers from learning more about the phenomenon of rape, and this occurs at the expense of an increased number of rape victims. 1994, page 59. Palmer's point is that if we misidentify the motives of rapists, we compromise treatment plans for the rapist, as well as efforts at rape prevention. This is what should concern us most as correctional workers. Lee Ellis supplies voluminous evidence to support his contention that rape is sexually motivated and that aggressiveness and dominating behavior exhibited by rapists largely reflect tactics rather than goals. 1991, page 632. However, he agrees that the drive to possess and control is a motive, although it is secondary to the sex drive. He states that in the overwhelming majority of acquaintance rapes, force is used only after other tactics, pleading, use of alcohol, claims of love, have failed, which makes it difficult to claim that rape is non-sexual. Similarly, Figueiredo, Sales, Russell, Becker, and Kaplan, 2000, Pyre 315, write that coercive sexual strategies are engaged in when the major non-coercive and pro-social avenues of sexual expression fail. Additionally, the non-human equivalent of rape exists in a number of animal species, making it difficult to claim that similar behavior in humans is motivated by hatred of females, or is the result of socialization. Thornhill and Palmer, 2001. If you are still not convinced, I will share more research on this in other videos, so please like and subscribe. And please share my videos especially with people who believe the claims I debunk. People usually don't search out opposing viewpoints, so please share it with them. Thank you.